Good evening, everybody. President Obama and his administration spent weeks scaring the American public, or at least trying to do so, about the dire effects of the dreaded sequester, a White House idea that the president promised would never happen while trying to get reelected. Sequestration went into effect last Friday, and the White House is now walking back as much of those apocalyptic predictions as they can. Here is President Obama last Friday lecturing the White House press corps about the alleged real-life consequences of failure to reach a compromise on the sequester.
Starting tomorrow, everybody here, all the folks who are cleaning the floors at the Capitol, now that Congress has left, somebody's going to be vacuuming and cleaning those floors and throwing out the garbage. They're going to have less pay. The janitors, the security guards, they just got a pay cut. And they got to figure out how to manage that. That's real.
That's real, you say, Mr. President. Real? Well, here's what the Washington Post says. That statement is not real, it's false. Definitely not based in reality. The Washington Post writing, quote, "Nothing in President Obama's statement came close to being correct." Let me read that again. Nothing in President Obama's statement came close to being correct. The Post cited the sequester plan acquired from the architect of the Capitol, the office that deals with janitorial contracts, and had a document that reads, quote, "We do not anticipate furloughs for AOC employees as a result of sequestration," end quote. And outrageously, the president's drama is more than misplaced, and Mr. Obama, at least unintentionally, broke faith with one of his biggest union supporters, the National Federation of Federal Employees Union. That's because the union had already promised to get back any lost pay for its members if they were to actually receive a sequester furlough, which they haven't, and apparently which they won't. The backlash against the Obama administration's reckless disregard for the truth in the sequester process has now officially begun. The New York Times and the Washington Post, pillars of the left, both publishing scathing opinion pieces this weekend regarding the president's campaign arm called Organizing for Action. This after reports that top donors would receive the privilege of quarterly meetings with the president if only they would cough up $500,000 in donations. The Times piece is entitled, "The White House Joins the Cash Grab," warning its readers about OFA, the president's personal political army. The Times editorial declaring, quote, "A closer look at this group shows how disturbing its work really is." How disturbing indeed. And the Post offering the following advice, writing, quote, The president ought to come to his senses. If he doesn't, it won't be easy to clean this muck off his shoes later on. Organizing for Action should be renamed Paying for Access. That stuff that's now in the president's shoes may not come off at all. He and his administration have been far too enthusiastic in their fear-mongering for many Americans to soon forget. And the polls are beginning to show at least early signs of fatigue with Obama drama and the politics of fear. The president's job approval is sinking. Today's Gallup Daily Tracking Poll has the president's job approval rating at 46%, falling from 51% just last Friday when the sequester deadline arrived. President Obama used the first business day after the sequester cuts went into effect to nominate 3 people to key posts in his administration, and he held his first cabinet meeting of his second term. After introducing some new faces to the team, the president went back to sequester backpedaling. Fox News Chief White House correspondent Ed Henry with our report.
Opportunities. At his first cabinet meeting since the sequester hit, President Obama declared the budget cuts are of deep concern. Though since the sky has not fallen, at least not yet, Mr. Obama also continued to try and carefully calibrate expectations.
But we can manage through it, and we're going to rely on the outstanding leadership of all these agencies to make sure that we do whatever it is that we need to get done to help America's families.
That came as Education Secretary Arne Duncan today declared, quote, language is important, as he apologized for his comments that drew 4 Pinocchios from the Washington Post.
When I said pink slips, that was probably the wrong word. I should have used job eliminations, positions eliminated. You've sort of heard repeatedly so I should have been clear there.
While the White House is also dealing with the president's own comments that initially drew 2 Pinocchios after his news conference on Friday that mentioned custodians working in the Capitol.
The janitors, the security guards, they just got a pay cut. And they got to figure out how to manage that. That's real.
Not so real, according to the architect of the Capitol. And the Washington Post has updated it as 4 Pinocchios.
Well, you know, first of all, those Capitol janitors will not get as much overtime. I'm sure they think less pay that they're taking home does hurt. But I think the real issue is that this is, as the president said, a slow grind.
Questions about hype continued as Homeland Security Secretary Janet Napolitano today claims sequester cuts at the TSA are having an immediate impact.
We are already seeing the effects at some of the ports of entry, the big airports, for example. Some of them had very long lines this weekend. I want to say O'Hare. I want to say LAX. I want to say Atlanta, but I'd have to check.
Fox Business did check with Airlines for America, an industry association, which said their members are, quote, not seeing unusual delays. Although U.S. Customs and Border Protection officials say cuts to overtime staffing have led to longer wait times for international arrivals.
So Sylvia knows her way around a budget.
The president today nominated former Walmart executive Sylvia Matthews Burwell as his new budget director and vowed he's ready to cut the deficit.
I'm confident that we can get there if people of goodwill come together.
Speaker John Boehner said he's ready to work with the president on a stopgap measure to avoid a government shutdown at the end of March, but raised doubts about whether Democrats are serious about a long-term budget.
The Senate hasn't done a budget for 4 years. They've committed to do a budget this year, and I hope that they do.
White House officials insist the president has already made progress on the so-called grand bargain.
We're $2.5 trillion along that road, so it may be the petite bargain, I guess, if you go all French.
House Republicans today introduced a bill to keep the government running, and it includes extra money to prevent sequester cuts to Border Patrol agents. Meanwhile, as for the broader presidential budget, that was due in early February. The president still has not submitted it. Lou?
And thank you, Ed Henry, Fox News Chief White House Correspondent. House Republicans today released a stopgap bill that would fund the government through the remainder of this fiscal year for the next 7 months. The bill maintains sequester cuts, but does give the Pentagon more money and more flexibility. Joining us now, former Deputy Assistant to President George W. Bush, Brad Blakeman, and Stephen Hayes, senior writer for the Weekly Standard, Fox News contributor. Gentlemen, thanks for being here. Let's start with first, Janet Napolitano. Brad, is making all sorts of outrageous statements this morning, none of which subsequently proved to be true. Reuters, Fox News, and others checking. What in the world was she thinking?
I guess she hasn't learned from Ambassador Rice or from Secretary Duncan. You can't make outrageous claims without it being fact-checked. You can't make outrageous claims to the American people and expect that you're going to get away with it. The fact of the matter is the president, as a leader, should have told the American people if sequester comes, I've put the word out to cause as least amount of disruption and pain to the American people, instead of telling the executive branch, have at it and cause the American people as much pain as possible.
See, as Brad says, I mean, this president has reacted entirely to the opposite. That is, promising to inflict pain, and apparently his Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security didn't get the memo saying to walk it back, as others have. She stepped out in front of it and is caught flat-footed misrepresenting reality to the American people.
Yeah, I mean, you'd think they'd learn. Maybe it's perhaps just a habit at this point. I mean, let's be honest. The first term, they didn't get called on this kind of thing nearly as often as they have been just in the last week. I mean, I think what we've seen is the White House press corps, the Washington press corps, sort of wake up to the idea that there have been these serial exaggerations that just didn't seem right on their face. I mean, I think the administration, the first term, could make claims that were not necessarily verifiable. They might have seemed like a stretch here and there, but these are verifiable claims in some cases, like Arne Duncan, like the question about janitors at the Capitol, like Janet Napolitano today. So reporters can just make a phone call and find out that they're not telling the truth. I think this is a real risk for the administration to have exaggerated this the way that they did, because they really look like they're crying wolf.
And the Washington Post, of all news organizations, of all newspapers, I mean, the Pinocchios are flying over there. 4 for the president for talking about janitors, 4 for Arnie Duncan, who, by the way, I mean, that was a pretty pathetic effort at trying to be candid and straightforward and apologize for his misstatement earlier, talking about he should have used positions being eliminated, which they weren't. And pink slips. So he gets 4 more Pinocchios, and it looks like he's working on another 4 if he's not careful. This administration, as you know, as Stephen has said, has gotten away with this for years, and suddenly we've seen a shift in the attitude of the White House press corps. Do you think that this is a transitory moment in history, or is this signifying something more permanent and more dangerous for this president politically?
Well, I believe that the chickens are coming home to roost for the president. He has been emboldened by himself and his staff to go out and basically scare, threaten the American people, and quite frankly, lie to us and not be candid with us. And he's gotten away with it to date. But I think the falsehoods have been so outrageous and been by the top levels of the management of this administration that even the press, who built this guy up, are now calling him on it.
Let me ask you both this question, because I was struck by the fact the day began with Jeb Bush, the former governor of Florida, the former president's brother, saying basically he's interested in being a voice of reason and leading the Republican Party, which he says right now is, well, all but lost. Stephen, I mean, this is about the worst time in which anyone in the Republican Party could be deflecting attention from this White House. Aren't there wise men to counsel these folks?
To tell him to be quiet, to wait on his book. I think basically there's a simple explanation. I think he's got a book coming out, and he wanted to be out there to promote his book. I mean, I think this was sort of baked in a long time ago, and the fact that he's coming out and stepping on the president's very, very bad week is perhaps unfortunate for Republicans. But Lou, if I can just briefly, I think your previous question to Brad, in some ways, I mean, not to overstate it, is honestly the big question in some ways of the second term. I mean,
well, that's the one I meant to underline and highlight, so I'm glad you gravitated back to it.
I mean, will the press corps sort of revert to its old ways and give the president a pass, or is this a new press corps? And I went back today because I was trying to think of the last time that the Washington press corps, particularly the White House press corps, has been so tough on the president. And it was after he introduced his budget for 2012 in February of 2011. And he was panned. I mean, the LA Times, the Washington Post, even the New York Times had scathing editorials about the lack of leadership on entitlements and debt and deficits. Dana Milbank with the Washington Post tore him to shreds on these questions. And I think going into this debate about budgets, where we're going to see 3 new budgets, that's the question, the one that you asked. That's the question. Will the White House press corps continue to put the pressure on the president to be serious about these big issues?
And Brad, that question, as we look at what is happening with this president, he can't stand for this feedback loop to open up, because then falls into question what has been a legacy of misstatements, misrepresentations, promises, whether it be the fact that something as innocuous as sequester won't happen, to the issue that he won't place taxes on middle-class Americans, working men and women, which he did.
Well, this president can't take criticism. And as Steve is right, this is a moment of truth in this White House. Either they're going to change or the press is going to change, which they're already starting to change. And the truth is going to come out, because there is no more tolerance for the kind of misstatements and misactions of this president.
And I think you're exactly right. And I think it's interesting as we wrap up here. This, in a strange way, began with our chief White House correspondent, Ed Henry, reacting along with his colleagues to the very simple fact that they were kept out of a 3-day weekend by this president, and then all that has flowed from that.